Have you ever wondered how someone can worship God even after losing everything? The Bible reveals in the story of Job a mystery that still intrigues us today: how to turn suffering into worship. The secrets of this biblical character are far from obvious, and each one hides practical keys to endure pain without losing faith. Get ready, because what you're about to discover can change the way you face your own struggles. And what if I told you there are 5 secrets of Job that almost no one talks about, but that explain how he managed to remain firm in the middle of chaos? That's exactly what you'll learn here. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us until the end, because this journey will open your mind and renew your hope in a way you've never experienced before. The first secret to worship in the midst of suffering is to recognize God's sovereignty. Job understood that nothing truly belonged to him. Everything came from the hands of the Creator. This awareness allowed him to go through loss without desperately clinging to what he owned. By admitting that life is a gift and not a possession, the soul finds rest even in days of pain. Recognizing that everything is temporary transforms the way we deal with circumstances. Job knew that if he placed his trust only in possessions or people, he would lose his foundation. That's why his security rested in something unshakable: the will of God. This perspective completely changes how we face each challenge. Accepting that control is not in our hands is a daily exercise. Imagine someone losing their job and, instead of giving in to despair, taking a deep breath and saying, "God is still in control." That was the posture Job assumed. He didn't pretend to be fine, but he also didn't allow pain to rob him of his trust in the Lord. Everything we receive should be seen as a divine loan. Job viewed his possessions, his children, and even his own life as temporary gifts. This doesn't mean coldness, but freedom. When we understand that we own nothing, we live lighter, give thanks more, and suffer less when something is taken from us. Many think Job was indifferent in the face of tragedy, but the Bible shows otherwise. He wept, tore his clothes, and lamented deeply. Yet in the midst of pain he declared, "The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away." This attitude reveals a mature faith, one that doesn't depend on favorable circumstances to remain firm. Trusting in God's sovereignty is like boarding a plane and knowing there's a pilot guiding it, even without seeing him. Job was misunderstood by many, but his confidence remained intact. He didn't need quick answers because he knew his story was guided by someone who sees far beyond what human eyes can perceive. I myself have lived through situations where I lost something important and felt tempted to complain. However, when I remembered that nothing truly belongs to me, I found peace. Perhaps you too have gone through grief, disappointment, or an unexpected loss. It's in those moments that divine sovereignty becomes almost tangible, bringing strength to keep going. Recognizing that God is in control is not resignation but freedom. It is understanding that He sees the whole picture while we only see a fragment. Job teaches us that worship begins precisely at this point, when we surrender control and trust in the Lord. And this opens the way to the next secret, even more challenging: keeping integrity when everything seems to fall apart. The second secret to worship in the midst of suffering is to keep integrity when everything seems to be against us. Job received harsh words from his own wife and was unjustly accused by friends who should have supported him. Even so, he did not curse God. His faithfulness did not waver under pressure, showing that integrity is stronger than any storm. Keeping integrity means not giving up principles in the face of pain. It is easy to be faithful when everything is going well, but the true test happens when we lose what we value most. Job could have revolted, could have abandoned his faith, but he chose to remain firm. That choice made him a living example within the biblical story. When circumstances scream for us to give up, integrity is what keeps the heart in the right place. Job did not allow his pain to turn into blasphemy. He suffered, he wept, but he did not let despair corrupt him. His posture shows us that even when everything collapses, it is still possible to remain standing. Job's faithfulness reveals that true faith does not depend on immediate rewards. He did not worship God because he received blessings, but because he knew who God was. This difference is crucial. Faith based on benefits is fragile, but faith based on God's character is unshakable. It is this kind of faith that withstands the worst storms. Integrity is like an invisible armor that protects us from external and internal attacks. Friends may judge, family may pressure, but those who choose to be faithful keep peace within themselves. This attitude not only honors God, but also inspires others to stand firm. Job's example continues to echo through the centuries as living proof of this truth. Today, we can see that same integrity in people who choose not to compromise their values, like the professional who refuses to lie to secure a promotion, or someone who keeps their word even when it costs them dearly. These decisions may seem small, but they are great testimonies of character, something Job lived out intensely. I myself once faced a situation where giving up seemed easier. The loss hurt, and everything suggested that abandoning faith would be the quickest way to ease the revolt. But when I chose to remain firm, I realized that decision brought inner strength. Perhaps you have felt the same, the pressure to yield, but also the peace that comes from not being corrupted. Integrity in the midst of loss is a seed that blooms in the right time. Job planted it in tears and reaped an eternal testimony. That faithfulness not only sustained him, but also opened the way for something even deeper. Because after resisting and remaining whole, he shows us another powerful secret: the importance of pouring out the heart before God with total sincerity. The third secret to worship in the midst of suffering is to pour out the heart before God without masks. Job did not pretend to be fine. He did not hide his pain behind pretty words. On the contrary, he exposed his anguish in prayer, opened his soul, and let every tear become a cry. This shows that true worship is not performance but sincerity before the Lord. Expressing pain before God does not mean weakness, but rather trust. Job understood that only the Creator could embrace his deepest lament. Instead of swallowing his suffering, he put it into words, revealing vulnerability. This posture teaches us that prayer is not only for days of victory, but also for the moments when we have no strength. Some believe that prayer must always be an act full of gratitude and joy. However, the biblical story of Job shows us that praying with tears is also worship. He reminds us that God prefers the honesty of a broken heart to a rehearsed speech. In this way, we learn that we don't need to hide what we feel in order to be accepted by Him. Pouring out the heart before God is like opening a window in a stifling room. Fresh air comes in, and the soul breathes. Job knew that repressing his pain would only increase the weight inside him. That's why he turned each groan into prayer, recognizing that vulnerability can be a pathway to healing. The Bible shows us that even the greatest biblical characters lived this experience. David wrote psalms full of tears, Jeremiah deeply lamented, and even Jesus wept at the death of Lazarus. Job follows this same pattern, proving that there is no contradiction between faith and pain. On the contrary, sincerity and weakness strengthens communion with God. Today, pouring out the heart before God may mean stopping for a moment in the middle of the rush to speak to Him, even if it's just to say, "I'm tired, I can't take it anymore." It is simplicity that connects the human to the divine. In those moments, we don't need long speeches, but authenticity. I remember a season when it seemed impossible to pray with enthusiasm. The words came out heavy, almost like complaints. but it was precisely in those sincere prayers that I found unexpected relief. It was as if, by pouring out my heart, I made space for God to place peace within me. Perhaps you have lived something similar. Job's posture teaches us that worship is not denying pain, but presenting it before the only one who can turn tears into hope. This is the secret that draws us closer to God's heart and prepares us for an even deeper discovery, valuing the divine presence more than any immediate answer. The fourth secret to worship in the midst of suffering is to value God's presence above quick answers. Job sought to understand his pain, but at the same time recognized the divine mystery. He did not receive detailed explanations, but he found comfort in the certainty that God was present. This shows us that true worship does not depend on answers, but on relationship. Many times we want God to solve our dilemmas immediately, as if he were an attendant ready to answer every question. But the biblical story of Job reminds us that there is an even greater value in simply enjoying the presence of the Creator. We may not always have explanations, but we always have the chance to experience the comfort that only He provides. Valuing God's presence is like being with a close friend. It doesn't matter if He has an immediate solution to the problem. The simple fact of being by our side already changes everything. Job discovered that God's presence was enough to sustain his heart, even when he did not understand the reason for his suffering. This is a lesson that transcends time. Worship gains depth when we stop seeking only what God can do and begin to contemplate who He is. Job reached the point of declaring, "I know that my Redeemer lives." That conviction was not born out of answers, but out of revelation. He understood that knowing God was more important than understanding every detail of his pain. Relationship with God is not measured by immediate solutions, but by the intimacy built in the process. When we value His presence, we understand that He is the greatest gift, not just the giver of blessings. Job shows us that even without clarity about tomorrow, the heart can rejoice today because it is close to a living God. It is interesting to notice that even today, many people approach God only in search of answers. But when they realize that He offers something far more precious, His very presence, everything changes. This understanding transforms prayer, which ceases to be just a list of requests and becomes an intimate conversation with the Creator. Myself have lived moments when my questions seemed to have no answer. God's silence bothered me until I realized that true comfort was not in understanding everything, but in feeling that He was with me. That discovery changed the way I pray. More than seeking explanations, I learned to seek closeness. Job's story shows us that God's presence is stronger than any logical explanation. This is the key that sustains faith in days of uncertainty, because it points to a greater truth, worshiping God for who He is, not just for what He does. And it is precisely from this place of intimacy that the next secret arises: waiting for restoration with hope. The fifth secret to worship in the midst of suffering is to wait for restoration with hope. Job went through long chapters of pain, misunderstanding, and divine silence. Even so, he kept in his heart the certainty that his story would not end in ruin. This posture sustained him until the moment God changed his fortune, proving that hope is fuel for faith. Waiting on God is not folding one's arms, but keeping alive the expectation that He continues writing the story. Job did not know when his situation would change, but he believed that the Redeemer was alive and active. This conviction kept him from surrendering to hopelessness. In this way, faith became a bridge to the future, even when the present seemed unbearable. Job's hope teaches us that every chapter of pain is only part of a larger storyline. The biblical story shows that in the end, God not only restored his possessions, but gave him double. This reminds us that God's restoration is Not limited to returning what was lost, it expands, transforms, and surprises. Waiting for restoration requires looking beyond the moment. It is like walking through a dark tunnel, knowing that at some point the light will appear. Job remained in that tunnel for a long time, but hope kept him from stopping halfway. This vision is what helps us endure periods that seem endless. Many people give up because they confuse delay with abandonment, but God's delay does not mean absence. Job witnessed this. Even in silence, the Lord was present. When he finally acted, he made it clear that he had never lost control. This lesson is vital for anyone going through seasons of waiting. Waiting with hope also shapes the heart to value God's presence more than the blessings received. When restoration comes, it does not steal the Creator's place, but strengthens the relationship with Him. Job not only received double, he also experienced a deeper revelation of who God was. I remember a time when I waited for an answer that seemed to never arrive. The delay wore me out, but when relief finally came, I realized I had learned much more in the process than in the victory itself. Perhaps you have also felt this, that the waiting time transformed you more than the achievement ever could. Job's restoration teaches us that suffering is not the end of the story, but part of the process. Hope does not deny the pain, but points to a possible tomorrow. This is the secret that closes the cycle, trusting that God is able to turn impossible scenarios into new beginnings. And with this key, we conclude the teachings that shape worship in the midst of suffering. Now that you've discovered the 5 secrets of Job for worshiping in the midst of suffering, the big question is, which one will you start applying in your life today? Is it time to recognize God's sovereignty, keep your integrity, pour out your heart in prayer, value His presence more, or renew your hope in restoration? Only you can take that step, and your decision can change everything. So, let me challenge you. Don't let this knowledge stay only in theory. Put it into practice, and then come back here to share what happened. And of course, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. It will be amazing to see this community grow, united by faith and hope.